This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. It's Black History Month. This month marks 55 years since the assassination of an NAACP leader in the city of Natchez, Mississippi. On February 27, 1967, Wharlest Jackson Sr. died when a bomb attached to his car exploded. At the time, Jackson was the treasurer of the NAACP in Natchez. He died on his way home from working, his first day of work at the Armstrong Tire and Rubber plant. He had just been promoted to a job never held by a black man before. Wharlest Jackson Sr. was 36 years old, the father of 5. The FBI suspected the assassination was carried out by the inner circle of the Ku Klux Klan, known as the Silver Dollar Group, but no one was ever charged in his murder. This tragic story is told in a new documentary that examines the civil rights struggle in Natchez. It's called American Reckoning. This is an excerpt from the film featuring Wharlest Jackson Sr.'s son, Wharlest Jackson Jr., who recalls his father's assassination. At the time, he was just 8 years old.
I stood right here working on my bicycle in front of my house. I was trying to get my banana seat right, and I had a nice big fat tire on the back of it. I used to see those guys riding those choppers. Man, I wanted to make my bike like that too, a little 20-inch bicycle. I heard the explosion in my mind, like, what is that? I never heard anything like that before. I jumped on my bicycle. I shot right there and then shot straight to this here, street here. You can look straight down the street to MLK. I'm noticing people outside of their houses, you know, and I just rode up there and started looking, and I saw a gentleman laying in the street. Not knowing who he was, and seeing the truck, knowing who truck that was, and not being able to connect the dots together. I saw a shoe that he was wearing, and I grabbed that shoe and came to the house. Later, I heard from my mother as I grew up, I had come back with his flesh in the shoe.
An excerpt from the new documentary, American Reckoning. The film goes on to look at how the community in Natchez, Mississippi, responded to the assassination of Wharlest Jackson Sr.
Nearly 1,000 Negroes are marching silently through the center of Natchez, protesting the bomb-slaying Monday night of civil rights leader, father of 5, Wharlest Jackson.
Jackson, an official of the local NAACP, had left his new job last night at the Armstrong Rubber Company, presumably en route home. The cab and the truck were completely demolished.
My father looked out for the black community in this town. And believe me, this community loved my father. He was just a god to me.
My father sacrificed his life so that we can have a better community and you don't have to be afraid. But will we ever get justice?
They've been killing us here for 400 years.
Right.
It's got to come to a head. And we sick and tired of that. We done built this country.
As soon as the white people realize that we aren't going nowhere, the better it's going to be for all of us. Wake up, white people, before it's too late.
An excerpt from the new documentary Frontline and Retro Report's new documentary American Reckoning, premiering Tuesday, February 15th on PBS and online at pbs.org/frontline, YouTube, and in the PBS video app. The project is supported by WNET's Chasing the Dream, We're joined now by three guests: Denise Ford Jackson, the daughter of Wharlest Jackson Sr., as well as the film's directors, Brad Lichtenstein and Yoruba Richen. It's great to have everyone with us, and Yoruba, former producer at Democracy Now!, a great honor to have you back as well. Yoruba, I want to begin with you, talking about this just devastating story that is many storylines put together. It is the story of a city in this country where at the highest levels the conspiracy of the government against the black population of Natchez. And the fact that we did not, many people in this country, I should say, had not heard of Wharlest Jackson, let alone his assassination, his murder.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy, for having us on. It's a story that when Brad told me about, Brad had been developing it, and he'll tell you about that for a couple of years before asking me to partner with him on this project. But when he told me about it, I was, immediately intrigued and interested in this story that I'd never heard of. I'm always love projects where I am learning something and uncovering a story that hadn't been told. And then when I saw the trailer that Brad initially made, and I saw that the amazing archival footage that really documented what was happening in Natchez and the murder of Wharlest Jackson Sr. I had never seen, this archival footage. I'd never seen the documentation of the story that was happening, like, in real time.
Let me say something about that, and I want to bring Brad in. I mean, this is so astounding, the level of detail of footage you have from over half a century ago documenting the movement in Natchez. And you have a direct link to the story as well, as you were an intern with John Lewis when he was running for Congress. And Congressmember John Lewis, the civil rights icon, figures into this story.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for asking me, because I love to remember my relationship with Mr. Lewis, who I met when I was 15 years old. I worked in his campaign, and then we became lifelong friends, and he's the author of the Emmett Till Act, and that's really how this project got started. I was visiting him in his office in Washington, and we were talking about different ideas for films. Secretary Brendan Jones told me about the cold cases that were being re-examined under the Emmett Till Act, and that might be a thing to focus on. And then I learned about the story of Wharlest Jackson Sr., and then discovered that filmmaker Ed Pincus and his filmmaking partner David Newman had actually been in Natchez at the exact same time making the movie Black Natchez, and that there were hours and hours and hours of outtakes, and that they had returned right after the assassination of Mr. Jackson and started to try to make a sequel. And so there's something like 30 hours of footage that never saw the light of day. And then we discovered that that footage had been collected into a collection at the Amistad Research Center and was actually going to be available to use, which is what gives us the ability to tell this story in real time, even though, as you pointed out, it happened over half a century ago.
So I want to bring Denise in, but first to the documentary again, American Reckoning. This excerpt begins with an archival clip from 1965 in Natchez.
To the school board for the Natchez Adams County Public Schools. The undersigned hereby petition your board to initiate racial desegregation of the public schools under your jurisdiction and control.
By late August, the NAACP filed a lawsuit against the schools for desegregation.
We would further request that the names of those signed this petition not be made public in order to protect the signers from possible reprisals and harassment.
There was a fear and a resentment of desegregation of the schools at the time in the white community. There was just wild rumors of what was going to happen if the blacks took over.
My dad and the Klan didn't want black people in our schools, offices, anything. They wanted to get it stopped at all costs.
George Metcalf, president of the Natchez chapter of the NAACP, was critically injured in Natchez this afternoon when dynamite hidden beneath the hood of his car exploded when he turned on the ignition.
When the bomb went off on the hood of his vehicle, a lot of that metal and brass just went back into his face.
After the bombing of Metcalf's car, the black community explodes.
After the 1965 bombing of the car of the Natchez NAACP leader George Metcalf, who did survive that, civil rights activists organized a massive boycott against white-owned businesses. This clip features Charles Evers, the brother of Medgar Evers, who was assassinated 2 years earlier in 1963 at his home in Jackson, Mississippi.
You tell the good mayor that I said you can get all that injunction, conjunction, and some junction you want to get. We're not going to spend our money with them anymore. Tell you how people can give them decent jobs and recognize them as individuals and human beings.
We decided we're going to boycott every white store in Natchez.
Downtown Natchez is under a strict boycott by nearly half the population. The boycott began when the Negroes failed to get their 12 demands from city officials.
The mayor at the time had a whole shopping center. Me and Nasser, we shut his whole damn shopping center down.
Keep the white man's dollar out of his pocket, and you can control him instead of him controlling you.
That last speaker was James Stokes, a spokesperson of the armed African-American self-defense group Deacons of Defense. Now let's turn to another clip of American Reckoning about the protest in Natchez in 1965.
There are these marches at night that are taking place. 300 marchers are arrested for parading without a permit.
I'm the Chief of Police, J.T. Robbins. If you don't disperse and go home, I will have to put you under arrest. Parading without a permit, which is in violation of the city ordinance.
There's another attempt to march, 150 are arrested. And then yet another march is attempted.
Get back on the inside, please!
We walked that about a block before the police stopped us. Dead buses coming and picked us up and took us to Washington, Mississippi.
Once they're at Parchment, it's cold, they were stripped naked, they were given a laxative.
They made us all drink about an 8-ounce glass. They said, well, you gonna drink this medicine or else get beat to death.
Again, a clip from American Reckoning. And now we're going to Denise Ford Jackson, featured in the film, the daughter of Wharlest Jackson Sr., the treasurer of the NAACP chapter in Natchez, who was assassinated 2 years later, from what we saw in that clip, in a bombing by the Ku Klux Klan. Denise, it's 55 years later, but our deepest condolences go to you and your family as you live this every day of your lives. It is so clear in this documentary.
Yes, it is, and thank you for having me this morning.
So, if you can talk about, I mean, the story of Parchman, your mother was in Parchman, right? Your mother was one of those arrested. She, like your dad, was unrelenting in trying to challenge the racist system. And they describe this horror of being put in these cold cells, stripped naked and forced to drink laxatives so that and they obviously had no access to bathrooms. And this is pure torture. What happened to your mother after this?
Well, she became ill. She formed a illness that kept her bedridden, and that meant my dad had to take care of the 5 children, cook for us, comb our hair. And then once she was able to, she came in with a sickness called lupus, which nothing kept her down, but she was able to, you know, regain her strength back. And she was able to do what she needed to do for the family.
So she's ill. She's come out of Parchman. Your father's continuing to organize. That was 65. Your father's assassinated in 67. Tell us what happened. And did you, I mean, you're a little kid at the time, but this ominous sense of the targeting of your family.
The only thing I can relate to is that I know that my dad was under a lot of pressure, being threatened with, you know, being able to, he wanted to accept a promotion at Armstrong. He discussed it with my mom. My mom told him not to accept a position, but he was a man that didn't take no for an answer. They were trying to make a stand here in the county, in the city of Natchez, to let people know that, you know, we as a Black was just as capable of handling these supervisor positions as the white man, even though they said these positions were for white only. But my father took a stand to wanted to make our community better. And my mother was one who was objected to it, but he wouldn't take no. He wouldn't accept the word no. He said, I'm gonna take this stand, because it gave him a 5-cent raise to help him with the 5 children that, you know, that he was trying to raise.
So Frontline and Retro Report, this documentary that Brad and Yoruba have made, also taps into the groundbreaking reporting of Stanley Nelson, another Stanley Nelson of the South, who investigated the allegations of the involvement of this Ku Klux Klan. You can't really call it an offshoot. I think the inner circle of, you know, sort of the white collar of the white sheets known as the Silver Dollar Group. This clip begins with Leland Boyd, the son of a Klan member.
I think my dad was probably on the foundation of the formation of the Silver Dollar Club. We would go in a restaurant and there would be several people sitting in there, and my dad walked up and he dropped a silver dollar on the table and says, "Does that have a familiar ring to it?" And the guy sitting at the table said, "Yeah, that sounds like freedom."
I don't know how to term them, and this is like a crude term, but if you had an all-star Klan team, that would be they would be in the Pro Bowl. A Silver Dollar Group member would be the kind of guy that thought wearing a robe was silly, who thought burning crosses was silly, who rejected the old Klan because they weren't achieving anything.
He kept his dynamite and hand grenades in the house, so I saw them. You just hear little things about, we got to take care of business kind of thing.
In the record, you would have some of these members of the Silver Dollar Group going back and forth across the Mississippi River, supporting each other with these very nefarious activities.
They were very quick to extreme violence. They felt very comfortable slaughtering people and knowing they could get away with it.
In that clip, we heard from the children of 2 Silver Dollar Group members. The last speaker was Cynthia Deitel, who is the former FBI Civil Rights Unit chief, charged with trying to solve some of these cold cases that dated back decades. Brad Lichtenstein, let's go back to you. What you learned, what the family learned, I mean, this amazing meeting that Denise, you and your brother and sister had with Stanley Nelson, the white reporter in Natchez, who really took on these cold cases. Brad.
Right. Stanley actually started writing about these cold cases in 2008, right at the beginning of the Till Act. And it really was because he realized he worked across the street practically from where a different murder had taken place right across the river in Vidalia and Faraday, Louisiana. And he got curious and he realized that if he didn't know anything about it, at least probably most white people didn't know the stories. And he started digging into the cases. And of course, he met the Jackson family and had talked to them some over the years. And really, he provided the full story, which the family never could get from law enforcement, whether it was local law enforcement or federal or the FBI.
Tell us, Denise, about that meeting that you have with Stanley Nelson, with your brother Wharlest, and with your sister, as he lays out for you who exactly he believes killed your father and how he did it.
It was one of the most amazing meetings that we've had, because back in the 67, when my mom was living and tried to find out information, she was given documents that had been redacted. Everybody's name was scratched out. She kept going back to the law enforcement. Even the FBI came and told her they came to assist the local police. And from there, we never received any names or anything, but meeting with Stanley Nelson, he was able to give me more closure to my daddy's death than the people here in Natchez, Mississippi were able to give her. And I hats off to Stanley for the job that he had done. Even the documents that we received from the FBI, was redacted, and we still didn't know anything. So I just appreciate the work that he did, because he gave us insight.
And talk about who you understand killed him. I mean, there's a broader question, like it's not one person. But the person who put the bomb on the left clicker of his car, so that when he turned left, they knew when he came from the factory, he would have to make a left turn into the black community. And it was set for, they believed he'd be going home at a time when all the kids were outside and would have killed so many, but he had to work overtime, so it was like 8 at night. And so when he makes a left turn, the kids aren't out. It just kills him. Who that man was of the white dollar, of the silver dollar group.
Stanley found out it was Ed Glover.
Red.
Yes. Somebody that we didn't know, I don't know.
Who later died.
Someone who's been
who later died, right.
He had been dead for a while, even before the Emmett Till Act was passed. He had been dead.
And I want to go to the Emmett Till Act, because now we're talking about the closure of all of these cases. This is a clip from American Reckoning about the FBI closing its investigation into your dad's murder, into the murder of Wharlest Jackson Sr. This is your brother, Wharlest Jackson Jr.
It was an FBI agent that knocked on the door. I opened the door up. He said, "I'm looking for Wharlest Jackson Jr." He went back to his vehicle and gave me that letter.
I received this letter in the mail, and it was a slap in the face. I felt like the FBI brought all this attention out to make themselves look good, and and our families still suffered. I often tell myself nothing will ever survive over here because of the prejudiceness that happened in this building. A lot of sadness, a lot of hurt.
People are going to be frustrated if someone isn't convicted, if someone isn't arrested. But at some point, a determination has to be made to close the case. We've talked to everyone who could possibly have any real information. How many times are we going to reinvestigate? There's no more value in asking more questions.
Yoruba Richen, we're going to end with you. So you have this Emmett Till law that John Lewis really authored and pushed through. 150 cases, 125 of them closed with not one indictment. And this goes right to Natchez, which is the microcosm of what we're seeing today. If you could talk about whether, in fact, this really ends things, or isn't this the case for reparations or for a kind of lawsuit that is a conspiracy of the entire state? I mean, Parchman was not one guy putting a bomb in a car. It was the state going after all those who protested injustice in Natchez.
Yes, I think that the fact that no one has been indicted for Wharlest's case or for these other cases shows that the limits of the justice system in holding people accountable for crimes that happened many years ago. I think it's important to note that we found out that Congressman Lewis, he wanted a larger thing, not just for the Justice Department to open up these cases, but he was really looking for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that would, in the vein of South Africa, where all these crimes would come to light, where people had to come and talk and air what happened and get at the truth. Of course, he wasn't able to do that. I mean, we live in an extremely polarized country where, talking the truth about this stuff is, that people don't want it to happen. We see that now with what's going on with this critical race theory ridiculousness. But all that to say is that I think this does open up a case for reparations, which we are now talking about in a real way for the first time, and looking at what these families deserve. What is justice for these families? Reparations, mental health, stuff to make them able to deal with this trauma that has happened, that we see with Denise, that we see with Wharlest Jr. What kind of services can we provide? So we really need to have that conversation because it's true. These people are dead, for the most part. I mean, for the crimes that were committed long ago. So how else can we repair the damage that was done and that generational damage? And I think that is about reparations and other services that can provide hope and help for these families.
Yoruba, you're premiering this film at the Laemmle in Los Angeles, and then next week it's going to premiere on PBS. And I'm wondering what you want people to take away from this.
I want people to take away, to understand that, first off, we didn't get to talk much about the Deacons for Defense, but that the civil rights movement, or the Black freedom struggle, as I say, is not just reduced to a nonviolent strategy, and that the Deacons for Defense were one of many organizations that fought back and protected their community, and that is also how rights and were won in many different communities. So I want people to understand that, and I want people to take away and to find out more about the history that has been erased.
We have 5 seconds.
Yes, to find out more about the history that's been erased, and also white people especially, because we're at a critical moment in this country where they're trying to erase our history.
Yoruba Richen and Brad Lichtenstein, directors of American Reckoning, and Denise Ford Jackson, thank you so much.